Let's go! Are you kidding me? Derrick Davis Jr. to LSU, the number 2 safety in the class? There's so much I want to get to today. But shout out to you, Ed Orgeron, and safeties coach Bill Bush that did the heavy lifting here. And, last week everyone was like, well, the only reason Sage Ryan went to LSU is because his cousin's a coach there, the LSU legend Kev Falk. But the recruiting magic is still there. For O to do this in the middle of everything that's going on, in the middle of the disastrous season, in the middle of, not even knowing what the future of the LSU defense schematically is going to look like. Heck, who's going to be the defensive coordinator? Is Bo Pelini? He still gets a commit. Someone that doesn't even come from SEC country. But it happens. Over Ohio State and Penn State. So just a little background and just a quick preview of everything we're going to get into. There are a few negative things that's going to come from this class, and it's something that irks me about college football recruiting, and I kind of get fired up about it. But first, let's keep it positive, okay? Hold that Tiger tweet from Ed Orgeron. Nothing better than seeing that. Anyway, let's get into some of the quotes from Derrick Davis Jr. And this comes via Rivals and 11 Warriors, the Ohio State site. LSU really separated from Ohio State and Penn State with their diversity, according to Davis. Culturally, there are so many different people. So this is an underside of recruiting that we tend to forget. Some kids like to go elsewhere just to live in a different part of the country, and that's part of the case here. But this is what really shows you that this was a great piece of coaching from LSU. That was just great. I feel like I fit in perfectly. Even though I don't know many of the commits, I feel like the coaching staff made me feel comfortable even though they couldn't see me. So last week, Derrick Davis Jr. made a visit to LSU. And earlier this week, I talked about the potential of him actually choosing LSU. It's nuts. That quote right there is nuts, because sometimes your best recruiters for your class are actually other kids in your class. So for the class of 2021, Garrett Nussmeier is actually the quarterback commit out of Texas, has been doing most of the recruiting. But according to Derrick Davis Jr. here, it wasn't any other recruit that made this decision for him or pushed him to go to LSU. This was mostly the coaching and the relationship building. So that shows you that there is a difference with LSU's recruiting compared to a lot of programs, because the team right now is awful, but kids still want to come. Now let's go to this next quote, because obviously just last week, LSU got Sage Ryan to commit, the 5-star out of Lafayette, the number 1 safety in the class. Oh, by the way, there are some other safeties committed already in the class of 2021. So this is what Davis had to say. To me, that means LSU has a chance of getting a really good 1-2 punch. Once again, I don't really know Sage Ryan, but you never know. Some guys say that they play safety might turn into outside linebackers, which we will get into in just a moment. So before we go any further, drop your comment below. What do you think about Derrick Davis Jr. committing to LSU? As it's a road to 1.5K. We're giving out all kinds of cool LSU cards. But let's continue. Derrick Davis Jr., obviously this is his 247 profile. Let's zoom in just a little bit. Number 2 safety, top 100 overall player. And it's just huge. It's just huge. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because Derrick Davis Jr. might actually be a better safety than Sage Ryan. And I know I got a lot of viewers in Lafayette. Before you go crazy, I'm not saying that he is a better player, because that would be false. Sage Ryan is a better football player with a higher ceiling. The difference between the two of them is that Derrick Davis Jr. actually plays safety at the high school level. That is his main job. He doesn't play a whole lot of offense, where at Lafayette Christian Academy, Sage Ryan plays on both sides of the ball. So going in, and this doesn't get stated enough, it is hard that first year when you go to college to transition from being an offensive player to being a defensive player. So every day for game day, Sage Ryan's focus is to actually score touchdowns for the team. Now, he's also focusing on defense, but there is a transition whenever you make that jump from high school to college, whereas Derrick Davis Jr. played safety in high school and he will be playing, obviously, safety in college. So as of right now, there isn't a whole lot of just stuff out there with Sage Ryan playing defensive back, whereas if you go look up Derrick Davis Jr. highlights on YouTube or whatever, you see this guy making plays, not getting beat deep, which has been a huge problem for LSU this year defensively. And this also dispels a big myth in college football. Oh my God, the team is terrible. That kid doesn't want to go to that school because the team it's the exact opposite. If you're Derrick Davis Jr., and you're not going to Pitt, which is 15 minutes from where he plays high school football, and you're not going to Penn State, which was 2 hours away from where he lives, or if you're not going to Ohio State, which is obviously closer than Baton Rouge, you want to go somewhere where you play, okay? You are making a massive shift in your life. Kids, when they see teams play bad, don't necessarily say, well, I don't want to go there. They actually do the opposite. They say, oh, look, I could play right away right now. So, yeah, LSU has had some of the worst safety play that they've ever had this year. That tells Derrick Davis Jr., wow, I can play as a true freshman. I can start as a true freshman. And historically, LSU has played safeties that are true freshmen. Jamal Adams, obviously, our boy Grant Delpit was a superstar as a true freshman. And honestly, let's just pull this up. I was thinking, is this the greatest LSU safety class ever? Right now it is, just based on rankings. Obviously, you have to go back to 2017 where you did get Jacoby Stevens, who was a 5-star, the number one safety, and he's lived up to that hype. But you also got Grant Delpit and Todd Harris. So this is arguably the best safety class since then, because not only do you get the number 1 and number 2 overall safety, you also got Matthew Langlois and Korey G. So now, a lot of people are expecting both of them to make the shift to a speedy linebacker. Korey G at 6'3", 185, probably a little bit better to make that shift. But if you look at Matthew Langlois' highlights, he's actually playing a lot of linebacker in those highlights. So LSU getting very athletic and getting some much-needed speed. So shout out to you, Ed Orgeron, and the LSU coaching staff for continuously recruiting. Now, let's get to the negative side of it. And it is an ugly side of college football. Yes, it's great LSU got Derrick Davis Jr. And yes, it's great that the Tigers are still recruiting at a ridiculous clip. Just last week, we thought Sage Ryan was going to Alabama. He chooses LSU. Derrick Davis Jr. surprises everyone, picks LSU, and that's great. But now the class is shrinking while it's growing because the slots available, 3. There's now only 3 slots. Now let's go and look at the players who could fill those 3 slots. Korey Foreman, Maason Smith, and Tristan Leigh. Those 3 slots are expected to go to those 3 guys if they choose to go to LSU. And that would be a dream class. In fact, that could catapult, surprisingly, LSU to the number 1 overall class in all of college football. But here's the problem with that. Is that means LSU is not done. This is way too early. We're still months away from signing day. Let's say all the players LSU already has committed want to keep their commitment. So if that happens, that means LSU's going to have to part ways or push some guys out. And I don't like that. If a kid commits to your school, and obviously recruiting's dirty, it could get ugly sometimes. If you offer a kid and that kid decides to commit, I think the right thing to do is to honor it. I don't think that's going to happen here. LSU so far, a big position of need is on the offensive line. They only have one offensive lineman committed in Garrett Dellinger. Tristan Leigh still out there. As we pointed out in our recruiting piece, Bryce Foster, an elite guard who's still out there. Savion Byrd they're still in contact with. They're trying to flip them right now. In order to flip them, you got to make sure you have the slots open for them. And then you still have Brian Thomas Jr. So let's go to Brian Thomas Jr. Elite wide receiver out of Walker, Louisiana, an hour away from Baton Rouge's campus. You already have 4 wide receivers committed, but none of them are 6'4". A lot of people are calling Brian Thomas Jr. the next Terrace Marshall. Obviously, the recruiting experts still believe he's going to choose LSU. Some people think he's going to Alabama. He could be. Either way, he's walking into a loaded wide receiver class. I think both schools have 4 wide receivers committed. The slots are starting to shrink. Are you going to say no to Brian Thomas Jr.? Heavens no. You got to take him. If you think, and everyone's projecting him to be Terrace Marshall Jr., you got to take him. And, you know, there's still other guys out there that LSU's interested in. Slots are going to have to open up. And by slots opening up, let's just face the ugly reality of it. All these guys that you've been happy that have been committed to LSU for quite some time, some of them won't be in this class. So there you go. I always call it like it is. I'm a diehard LSU fan, and this is shaping out to be one of the best recruiting classes at LSU ever. And in fact, I'd go on ahead and say it is, considering the team has been not great. But Ed Orgeron is still bringing them in like crazy. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Obviously, we got a lot coming up with the Alabama game and live streams on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Central. It's just the best, okay? Commit to this channel. Commit to this channel. Subscribe to this channel, okay? It's our LSU. Let's go. Derrick Davis Jr., let's go. Woo. Let's get some chicken wings tonight. Let's go. Yeah.